That's what I was wondering, if the water tunnel, I know exactly what
And one of the sites in Myrtle,
my
they
district used to start.
have both sides of Myrtle. They are on the north side, they have like the site where shaft is.
Yep.
But I think there's some,
There's an A, B, and C line. It's on the C right now. It's really big. It's very big. It's
Yeah.
probably 15 individual blocks.
Wow.
and when we did the rezoning,
So it's like 200 by 200.
like, well, the bar part, I'm not sure, but the land is bigger than that, even. It's more than an acre. Yeah, and like when we did the rezoning, I don't think Tish tried to do carving in anticipation of it, because we want to take development pressure off the place to start. Yeah, I can't remember what the road on the market, but if you're interested in something, I can always dig it out.
Yeah, it's gonna come. So is the clock coming?
We don't need it yet. We can have speakers in the shop,
Okay.
so I hope for the next half hour will help.
Beautiful. Good evening and welcome to Borough Hall. My name is Diana Reina and I'm the Deputy Brooklyn Borough President. I'm joined by our Land Use Director, Richard Bayrak, and our Land Use Coordinator, Ina Gusenfeld, who organized what would be these very important public hearings. I want to thank Tanya, who is with us. Tanya is counsel to our Borough Hall team. There are 2 items on the agenda this evening. Please note that this hearing is being recorded to comply with the public law for transparency. It will be available for viewing on Borough Presidents' website, brooklyn-usa.org, or on the One Brooklyn channel on YouTube. Again, web viewers may submit timely comments to Ask Eric at brooklynbp.nyc.gov for Borough President Adams' consideration. Please call the first item and let us begin.
Calendar item number 1150187 PQK.
Mario, I'm sorry.
Sure.
We apologize.
Not at all.
So I just want to make sure, I want to make sure that ACS is prepared to go first. Yes? Okay. So Friends of Crown Heights, 11. This application by the Administration for Children's Services and the Department of Citywide Administrative Services for the acquisition of property located at 995 Carroll Street in the Crown Heights neighborhood of Community District 9. Such actions would facilitate the continued provision of child care services at the site, according to a lease. Community Board 9 will be voting on this application on November 28, 2017. Borough President Adams will hold off on making any decisions until he hears from the board. Would Ken Robinson, the representative for this application, please state your name for the record and present the application?
Hi, my name is Kenneth Robinson. I'm a lawyer with the Office of General Counsel of ACS, and I'm speaking on behalf of the application. We are asking that the Borough President continue the use of the space of the Child Care Center. This space is designed specifically as a Child Care Center. It's now contracted with Friends of Crown Heights, and the children there have to be certified as dual eligible, meaning that families earn less than 200% of the federal poverty level, and there's a reason for care, the authorized reasons being working, being in school, being in a training program, having no home, or having been looking for work for up to 6 months. And we've had the site since the 70s, the early 70s, I should say. The proposed term length, we're trying to get a 10-year plus lease plus 10-year extension. The how long it, the structure of it is still under negotiation at this point. It could be either an initial 5-year with a 5-year extension and 2 more 5-year extensions, or a straight 10-year with 2 5 years right to extension. But the lease will take effect once the work scope improvements are completed, which is probably be historically between 12 and 18 months after the signing date, which gives us an additional period of time to occupy the space while we negotiate a longer time there. And this lease expired in 2014. As I said, the current contractor is Friends of Crown Heights, and we have a contracted capacity of 77 preschool seats. According to the information I have at point, we have 7 classrooms, 6 which have children, 1 which is either vacant for our purposes or occupied by the Department of Ed. And for hiring, I would just say that ACS does not do the direct hiring. Generally, generally the hiring Nexus is the Child Care Council website, and we encourage people from the community to apply. And I'm ready to take questions I can't answer, Mr. Bitar will hopefully be able to answer.
Are you done with the presentation?
And I'm done with the presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ken. I wanted to just ask, we'll start with, in the interest of the community for childcare facilities to serve neighborhood residents, what is the number of contracted seats and what are the criteria for selecting children to attend the center when vacancies arise for both contracted and uncontracted seats? So you mentioned 77 preschool seats,
Right.
but the total number for licensing for the building is how many?
I believe it is 77 still.
Okay, so 77 seats in total.
Right.
Licensed seats, and the contracted number of seats with ACS is 77?
Right.
And you mentioned 7 classrooms are dedicated for preschoolers?
Right.
Ages,
Ages would be 2 months to 5 years.
2 months?
Yeah, I think we used preschoolers here in this sheet to include 2 years. 2
Okay.
years. Excuse me, I
That
misread.
changes.
2 years. 2 years. We don't take
Sure.
that.
So 2 years to age 5.
Right, and I think toddlers are encompassed in this presentation with preschoolers. And I don't see a breakdown between toddlers and older preschoolers.
So the toddler being age 2
2 to 3.
to 3.
Yes.
And then you have 1 DOE classroom.
Right.
So that's a total of 8 classrooms.
7.
Okay, so 6 classrooms are for ACS.
Right.
And 1 for DOE.
Right.
For universal pre-K?
I believe so.
Yeah, it's 2 to 5, I think
Yeah, I believe it's one vacant class. I believe the total of 7, 1 being utilized, if my information is correct. However, we'll check on that and I'll get back to you about that. And 1 is either vacant or used by DOE. I believe the one that we have as vacant for our purposes is used by DOE.
But it's vacant or utilized? Is there enrollment in that classroom?
The DOE does have,
Could you identify yourself?
Okay.
For the record.
my name is Michael Bitar. Correct. The DOE, I spoke to the director this morning, has 18 children in it. And she has 25 children in after school as well. And then 63 currently enrolled under ACS funding. These are the last few numbers I got from the director, but they do change, by the way.
Of
I mean,
course.
yeah, season to season.
And you said there's 66,
63.
63?
Preschoolers.
So 63 preschoolers with Crown Heights under ACS occupying 6 classrooms,
Correct.
and 18 children in the one DOE classroom with an after-school program of 25 students.
Yes.
Do you know how many of the seats are set aside for cross-subsidized seats for parents whose children are not qualifying with subsidies?
No, we don't have that information. Allison.
Could you please communicate in trying to get the answer to that question from the Crown Heights? We were trying to get in touch with them, and we did not succeed. So we just want to make sure that through ACS, we're able to understand how many, if any, are private cross-subsidized seats set aside for families who don't qualify under what would be the provisions and requirements of subsidized families for childcare. Borough President Adams had been concerned that city lease terms were not as long as they have been in the past because more financial lucrative opportunities are available to landlords. Childcare facilities are at risk from losing their leases and not being able to continue serving their communities. We appreciate that unlike lease renewal requests at the start of this administration, when leases were proposed for 5 years, applications are more likely to be calling for 10-year leases, and most recently for 2 5-year with renewal options of up to 20 total years, as has been advocated consistently by Borough President Adams. What is the anticipated duration of this lease, and what rights would the city have to renew and rights of first refusal to protect the interest of the city taxpayer dollars?
We are pushing for a 10-year lease with two options to release, to re-lease, renew rather, for 20, which would make it a total of 20 years. But again, the total terms are still to be determined. They're still being thrashed out by between DCAS and the owner.
And those are the 2 options on the table in the midst of negotiation,
Right,
pending what are conditions to the building that would have to be addressed.
right.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to excuse myself. Richard's going to continue the hearing. I have to go and present and participate in a judicial swearing in, so I apologize, but I leave you in great hands.
Okay. Part of Borough President Adams' vision for Brooklyn includes beautification of our streets. With the sidewalk in front of 995 Carroll Street extending into a paved front yard, there appears to be an opportunity to add seating in proximity to the existing planters. In addition, there is a section of the facade without windows that might be an appropriate location to produce a mural as a streetscape improvement. As part of the lease negotiations, would it be possible to secure a bench in the front yard and also an opportunity for a mural project on a facade, for example, through the involvement of a community arts organization?
Mr. Bitar will respond to that.
ACS is aware and familiar with your concerns, and they have been working with city planning to include in the scope of work elements of beautification for the front, for the sidewalk, and in specific, I have seen actually a few centers with already added benches and trees, and there is an energy, definitely positive energy, to make that happen at this center. This center does have, already has a few planters. I don't know if you saw them.
Yes, we've seen the planters, and off to one side where we are suggesting perhaps a mural, where there are no planters, perhaps a bench, again, because the city right-of-way continues where you have a front yard. Usually we've had the applications, the buildings are built right up to the right-of-way. Here we have a setback, so That's why we're raising this a little differently.
Yes, I will move these recommendations forward to ACS in terms of murals and benches. And we are on the same page with you on this.
Right. Normally, we talk about city bench because we're talking about the public realm here because it's actually private property. That's why we're not mentioning the city bench initiative.
Oh, I see.
That's why needing something to be in the lease becomes the only way to get there.
I hear you. Okay.
And because we have the grates in front, you know, it's a little different than the conditions we've typically had.
Okay.
We will, of course, pass on the Borough President's recommendations to the cast negotiator.
Okay, and I thank you for covering the point about local hiring. Typically, we've asked that in the questions, so I think we're all set with questions. Do we have speakers sign up for this item?
Are there any speakers on this item? Anybody who hasn't yet submitted a speaker's list?
Okay, so since we have no speakers, we are completed with this first item. Calendar item number 2, 180065 PCK. This application by the Department of Environmental Protection and the Department of Citywide Administrative Services for the selection and acquisition of 3 privately owned parcels adjacent to the head of the Gowanus Canal in Brooklyn, Community District 6. Such actions would facilitate the construction of a combined sewer overflow control facility at 242 Nevin Street, 234 Butler Street, with a staging area at 270 Nevin Street. Community Board 6 voted to approve this application with conditions on November 8th, 2017. Before I introduce the applicant's representative, I want to acknowledge Steve Levin's office is present. Ben Solitaire is here. So would Mario Bruno, the representative for this application, please state your name for the record and present the application.
Thank you. My name is Mario Bruno. I'm Assistant Commissioner for Intergovernmental Affairs at DEP. Good evening. My name's Mario Bruno, as I said. I'm an Assistant Commissioner with our Bureau of Public Affairs. I'm joined today by colleagues from DEP's Bureau of Engineering, Design, and Construction, and Environmental Policy and Analysis. We're pleased to be here to present to you about our Gowanus CSO facility project as part of the acquisition and site selection application to ULURP. As you all know, the Gowanus Canal was designated a Superfund site in 2010. The EPA has identified a number of potential responsible parties, including New York City and National Grid. The EPA has required the city to remediate petroleum-based contaminants at the canal and reduce combined sewer overflows into the canal. Over the last decade, DEP has been investing in projects to reduce CSOs in the canal, such as the Flushing Tunnel and Gowanus Pump Station upgrade, the high-level storm sewer project on 3rd Avenue, and green infrastructure, including construction of many rain gardens. The project we are here to discuss today will continue to work to limit CSOs into the canal by constructing 2 underground tanks and associated head houses to intercept and store CSOs during wet weather events. The 2 sites are at the head end of the canal, or we call it the head end, or the dead end of the canal. The 2 sites we're talking about are at the head end of the canal, which will accommodate an 8 million gallon combined sewer overflow tank. And at the bend of the canal, the site which we call the Owl's Head site, which will have a 4 million gallon tank. Both sites will have associated above-ground structures to house pumps, screens, electrical equipment, and importantly, odor control. When completed, the head-end facility will reduce the CSO volume by 76% and solids by some 82%. Some storms will exceed the capacity of the tank and pass through the facility, but that CSO, even though these combined sewer overflows, will receive some treatment through the screening and settling as it moves through. As far as the ULURP action, we are pursuing, the action we're currently pursuing is for the site selection and acquisition of the head-end site. We will also demap Douglas Street between Nevins and the canal to clean up the city map. This action is a few months behind the current ULURP. A ULURP for the Owl's Head site will follow, but that's on a separate schedule. We anticipate ULURP will be completed by next April. As for the project locations, here's a three-quarter aerial view, where you can see the different sites. The sites associated with the current ULURP are RH3 and RH4. RH3 and parcel 1 next to it, a staging area that will be leased. RH4 is the Thomas Green Park. The city fought hard to avoid building this facility on the park property, as it would disrupt this important community facility in an already open space-starved neighborhood. The EPA does, however, retain the right to force the city to build there should any of the scheduled milestones be missed. The Owl's Head site, OH007, the Owl's Head site will be subject to a later ULURP action. And now here's a view of the surrounding area and an overhead view. And again, looking in at the head-end site, you can see the canal, the park we just mentioned in green, DEP's pump station in red, and the new site delineated by the dotted red line. The site was selected because of its advantageous proximity to the outfall at the head of the canal. The location has the most hydraulic efficiency that maximizes the capture of CSOs. There are a lot of pluses with this site. Operationally, it allows for us to service the facility through our existing driveway at the neighboring pump station. It also allows for a shorter construction period, and rather than disrupt and alienate parkland, we are able to add open space above the tank and provide waterfront access. And as you know, we've been working with the council member and city planning and doing a great deal of work with the community as part of the neighborhood planning study. We've been working with them from the beginning. The planning study has been a helpful touchstone, and the project team has taken to heart a number of those recommendations. We have a great design team on board who are very familiar with the neighborhood, and an architect who is really adept at creating buildings that work within the city's design vocabulary in a contemporary way. Here you can see the general massing of the head house. And you can see the outline of the tank to the south, on top of which we're working to provide public open space for passive recreation here. You can see from this drawing that the design team carefully examined the surrounding architecture to ensure that the structure fit in with the neighborhood character. You can see how the massing is broken down, and the highest roof line aligns with that of the neighboring building, an old publishing plant across Butler Street. We'll be able to provide public open space for passive recreation above the tanks, you can see over here, along with waterfront access to the canal, which we hope to set the tone for future waterfront development to follow suit. As for the milestone schedule, construction of the head-end facility is divided into 3 construction phases to facilitate the sequence of work and the construction activities by others. Our construction activities at the head-end facility are expected to take approximately 7 years, with additional time expected to be required for site remediation by National Grid. Our team has worked really hard on this sequencing and is coordinating closely with the EPA and National Grid to ensure that these milestones are met. As I mentioned earlier, should we miss a deadline, EPA has the right to make us build on Thomas Green Park which again, the city feels would be a real hardship on the community, already starved for green space. EIS. We've conducted a careful environmental impact study, or the draft EIS, which is essentially an assessment and disclosure of the potential adverse impact, the potential adverse significant environmental impacts from construction and operation of the facility. This document covers both the head end facility and the Owl's Head facility. And here you can see the categories that could be covered by the EIS of what can be cultural resources and construction noise. As for the historic resources, the New York State Historic Preservation Office, or SHPO, has identified 3 properties on our proposed project site as being contributing to the National Register eligible Gowanus Canal Historic District. These are 270 Nevins, 242-44 Nevins, and 234 Butler, aka also known as 226 Nevins, which are all here shown on the map. Primarily, SHPO has encouraged DEP to take a hard look at retaining, preserving the former Gowanus Station at 234 Butler Street. Due to the structural conditions of this building and the large-scale excavation required to build the tanks, it is unlikely that it can be retained in its entirety. We continue to assess the possibilities and we are coordinating with SHPO on this issue. Here you can see some photographs of the properties identified by SHPO. This is 234 Butler. And you can see some of the features over here. There's a pediment at the top over here. And on the lower right, there's an ornamental, which I just mentioned, the ornamental pediment with a terracotta plaque. We're aware that many in the community feel tied to the building, in particular the decorative pediment and the plaque that bears the community's name. This feature can be retained, restored, and reintegrated into the project in a way that speaks to the history of the site. As far as archaeological, the draft EIS also identified potential impacts with archaeological artifacts, and we are working with Landmarks Preservation Commission and SHPO to formulate a mitigation plan. As far as the impacts of construction, the draft EIS generally found that construction would not present an adverse impact. However, given the duration and intensity of construction, noise levels at residences at 282 and 285 Nevin Street are predicted to result in temporary significant adverse noise impact. Unfortunately, because these buildings use window air conditioning units, provision of storm windows and other facade treatments would not lower the interior noise levels. Finally, the EIS did not find adverse impacts for socioeconomic conditions, but we wanted to address the concern because we've heard about displacement, the concerns about the displacement of businesses and local workers. There are 11 businesses with 139 employees on the 3 sites we are acquiring. We've been working closely with Eastern Effects on a relocation plan, and we've also been in discussion with the other business owners. We're committed to helping with relocation services for all businesses. And that's the presentation.
Thank you. So we have a few questions for you. So you just mentioned that the businesses, we understand there's also some nonprofit uses. I don't know if that's included in how you're counting the businesses, particularly 242 Nevins and 234 Butler. That would have to be permanently vacated in order to prepare the site for construction. Should DEP acquire these properties in advance of its targeted deadline, so you're looking to start work roughly April 2020, So should you receive the property successfully from the owner at a date before that, would the owner be required to have the buildings unoccupied when the city receives them, or would there be an opportunity for the tenants to stay perhaps up to the 2020 April date? Assuming, again, these tenants have not already secured alternatives elsewhere.
Why don't you guys come over?
And if you could identify your name when you come up.
Of course.
Hi, my name is Kevin Clark. I'm a portfolio manager with the Department of Environmental Protection, Bureau of Engineering, Design, and Construction. To answer your question, I think we could be flexible in negotiating a date for vacancy of the property. We are under an order so that we acquire the property and start construction no later than the 2020 date. But if it happens sooner, I believe there is an opportunity to negotiate when we could, when those businesses, whether the nonprofit or otherwise, could, vacate the property and include some provisions for helping to relocate those businesses.
Thank you. So the provisions for relocating them could happen even if the property's in private ownership, as opposed to simply where the ownership changes and the tenants are still there, that the obligation of the city assisting could start prior to actually the city taking ownership? Just want to clarify that.
Yes.
So if you could go into a little more particulars in terms of the type of consideration the city gives to help secure other spaces elsewhere, in terms of what could be done in that regard.
So I'll provide an example of what we're doing with Eastern Effects right now. So through the city's Economic Development Corporation, EDC, that is EDC, they are looking to construct a new film studio in Sunset Park and negotiating with Eastern Effects to relocate Eastern Effects to that movie studio. I know in other instances, like Willets Point in Queens, there were a number of businesses that were also offered relocation assistance. So they helped them find, a new property, help with moving expenses, that sort of thing. We haven't discussed any details with any of those other businesses, but that is something that the city has done in the past and could do in this instance.
Thank you. So regarding then Eastern Effects, if you could talk a little more detail about what the city intends to do to provide the space so they could remain with their operation in Brooklyn.
I don't think we can share that many details right now as these are like active negotiations. But I believe what I can say is that that EDC is looking to construct a new film studio and looking to offer Eastern Effects, right of first refusal, and preferential rates for leasing the property, that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you. So as you mentioned in the presentation, the environmental analysis disclosed that constructing the CSO facility will result in significant exposure to non-mitigatable noise, dust related to construction, and perhaps, although not directly with those two buildings, we do have the park in proximity to the construction. So for those who may be residing or working in the nearby buildings, understand that that may be the case in one or both of those buildings. What responsive outreach and communication measures are envisioned for those who would be subject to the quality of life and air quality impacts and noise impacts associated with the construction? When is the engagement beginning, and then how does it happen throughout the project?
I'm Terrell Eskison. I'm with New York City DEP's Bureau of Environmental Planning and Analysis. The good news is we didn't identify any dust or air quality impacts from construction. Noise, however, we did identify temporary significant adverse noise impacts due to the duration and intensity of construction going on there. We will be implementing what can be done on-site in terms of what are called source controls to keep the noise levels down, but with this level of effort, there's only so much you can do. We looked then at the receptor controls, and there's limited opportunities because of the construction of these buildings and that the ventilation and the air exchanges through the windows, so you can't create a sealed condition on those. When construction begins, we'll have a CCO or a construction liaison who will do outreach in terms of what to expect and when. And that begins, that's part of the contract. The contractor will employ that to engage with the community.
Thank you. As the stormwater holding tank first requires substantial excavation to prepare the site, removal of excavated materials requires an extensive carting operation. In addition, the operation of the facility would require removal of debris moving through the sewers. Reliance on such carting operation by truck would exacerbate current noise conditions and add more vehicles to congested streets leading away from the Gowanus industrial area. As the site abuts a navigable waterway, what consideration has been given to moving the excavated material and eventually the debris by barge rather than solely by truck as a means to minimize noise and congestion in the greater Gowanus Canal area?
Sure. It is expected that while we are constructing this tank, there will also be the significant activity in the canal for the dredging and capping. And EPA basically told us that we should not be considering the use of barges for the removal of material because logistically you won't be able to do both at the same time. As far as removing the collected material during the operation of the facility, we expect this facility to only operate, to be, to capture events about 40 times a year. And for those 40 times, at most, you would have 2 dumpsters per event. So that is potentially 80 dumpsters per year. We don't think that would be a significant impact on noise and traffic in the neighborhood.
Thank you. And regarding the debris that's been collected, there's perhaps lessons learned from the Flushing Meadows and the Patagon holding facilities. So in terms of what gets collected in those dumpsters, how much consideration has been given in the past or perhaps could be given moving forward to what might be sustainable in terms of reusing materials or processing it in a certain way that we haven't looked at to date? Is anything that we're collecting within the screening something that may be recyclable or not simply a landfill solution?
I think we'll take a closer look at that and get back to you.
Appreciate that. So Community Board 6, in their resolution, they shared that the building at 234 Butler Street, in addition to other nearby structures, has some architectural and historical significance. And the board is generally concerned with the potential loss of historic resources around the Gowanus Canal. In planning for the construction of the planned head-end facility, what measures would ensure that consideration is given to the fullest extent in incorporating the buildings in some form into design? What has been done to date and what might be able to be evaluated moving forward before settling on a final design?
So at a minimum, we had always planned to save, I wonder if I can go back to the picture. Yeah. So at a minimum, we had always planned to salvage the pediment, plaque that's on top of the Gowanus Station building and somehow rework that into the design of the new facility, whether it's the open space or the design of the new facade of the building. And so that is still the current baseline. That's the minimum that we intend to do. We've also undertaken an engineering analysis to look at other alternatives for preserving the building, but it's going to be very, very difficult to do so.
So in terms of that engineering analysis, being with access to the site without because of your design schedule, in terms of borings or understanding the wall conditions, like how easy is or hard actually to get the information that would help you make an informed decision?
So basically, what we need to do is construct a very large underground facility adjacent to a building that's 100 years old. We've done a lot of geotechnical testing on the property already. There's a significant amount of additional testing of the materials of construction of the existing building, as well as some additional investigations into how the building was constructed to see how much additional support would be provided, would need to be provided in order to retain the property while constructing our CSO facility. We've made some assumptions on that in lieu of that testing and additional investigations right now. But does that answer your question?
So there's no additional testing you would need to do in terms of borings to understand foundation depths or soil conditions?
Not additional borings. We'd have to do some additional, somewhat destructive testing on the building. So, testing of the mortar, some removal of some interior walls, that sort of thing.
Thank you. So we are now going to go to testimony. Okay, first speaker is Michael Salvatore. And if you come up, if you need to sign a slip, if someone would like to sign, hasn't signed in, we have speaker slips up here.
Hi, I'm here to speak for the historic preservation of the building. I know you mentioned that facade might be continued, but it's also important that other things get continued and maybe even use the building as some type of a history site. During this past summer, I took a tour of Washington Park, where the old stone house is, and how it has been turned into a Revolutionary War museum where school kids and others, adults, etc., do go through frequently. A couple of months ago, Borough President Adams wrote a really strong piece about what's happening not only in Brooklyn, but throughout the city and really throughout many other cities too, how the culture is changing in such a way that there is no memory of the past, that people who come in, new people, greatly wanted and greatly needed, but at the same time, they're coming to a spot that has a history. And the history of the Gowanus area includes the Brooklyn Dodgers, includes Washington Park, where the stone house was, where the first battle of the Revolutionary War was fought and lost, depending what side you're on. And this building, too, could stand as testimony to what the industrial use of the canal was. It could be a museum. It could be many different things. In addition, I would hope that it could also be used as a place for one of those small waste tank to be placed. So I'm here to say that let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. News here, we know the canal is going to be changed drastically in the next decade or so, not just in terms of cleanliness, but in terms of architecture and design and et cetera. Let's keep what we can keep, use it if we can in a modern way, but also let's keep what we can keep. And I think we definitely could keep this, could and should keep this house. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Linda Mariano.
First, I'd like to say there's a moral issue here. I don't
Can you
DEP
start with the mic and say your name for the record?
Linda Mariano. I think there's a moral issue here, and that is that DEP doesn't own this building. They're planning to take this building by eminent domain. Is that the way to go? Is that the way citizens and civilization should be treated? This is taking somebody's property, paying an enormous sum of money and probably years of litigation in order to usurp the building's owner and his family, the workers, and the other people along this strip as well, down to Sackett Street, on Nevin Street, when there are other properties that are for sale in the area where I think, I'm not an engineer, but it makes sense to me that a tank could be built on another location rather than taking somebody's private property and their livelihood and ruining their families. And furthermore, the water supply distribution Gowanus Station is currently being evaluated for designation as an individual landmark by the Landmarks Preservation Commission pursuant to 2 formal requests for evaluation that have been acknowledged by LPC in writing. This is a process set out in municipal law and needs to be considered. Community Board 6 did not know this process was being considered, and I am submitting the request for evaluations and the acknowledgement from LPC. Also, the site design is under review and it has not been approved by the Public Design Commission, which needs to call out something about the architectural, historical, and design value of the building as part of the overall site plan. And an approval by the Brooklyn Borough President that does not include a guarantee of preserving this building would be very premature. Now, Community Board 6 has asked DEP to consider saving the building. We are asking the Borough President to demand the site plan actually be revised by DEP before any other work is done. We are asking the site review be tabled until DEP comes back with specific plans about how the building will be preserved. The State Office of Historic Preservation, in a letter to the EPA Superfund team, stated the Gowanus Station building can be accommodated on the proposed CSO tank site without jeopardizing the CSO tank project. Please note also, submitted is a copy of the request to Rashid Lucas, Project Manager, Bureau of Environmental Planning Analysis at DEP, and also to Vincent Sapienza, Acting Commissioner of DEP, to address with proper protocol the historic preservation covered by Section 106 of the National Register of Historic Places and the State Historic Preservation Act, also known as Section 1406, which includes an archaeological component. And I urge the DEP reconsider the use of eminent domain for the significant historic property, which will result in a negative cultural impact for Gowanus. Losing this edifice because of a lack of creative alternative will poorly reflect on all parties involved and will be a serious loss to the built environment of this historic and industrial neighborhood, especially in light of a rezoning where care should be on an interagency level.
Linda, if I could ask you to try to wrap up soon.
Ooh, interactive, where care should be on an interagency level to carefully evaluate actions, effects on the built environment. Based on a review of the project details to date, it appears feasible to retain and incorporate the historic former Gowanus Station building into the project. This comes from the State Office of Historic Preservation. This building, which has a prominent street presence on the corner and at the very edge of the city's preferred site, has overreaching significance on the National Register eligible Gowanus Historic District. Its demolition would adversely affect both the building and the National Register eligible Gowanus Canal Historic District. To destroy the intact architecturally distinctive...
Again, ask you to wrap up.
Ooh, I'm trying.
You could also submit everything in writing.
I will. I plan to do that. Okay, I'll read one more couple of lines, please. This unique building should be incorporated into the tank design. We all want distinctive neighborhoods. Here's a chance for the Brooklyn Borough President to help us achieve that in Gowanus by refusing to sign off on a site design that calls for demolition. We are asking the Borough President to demand the site plan be revised by DEP and how the building will be preserved. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, David, I'm going to have problems with the last name here. Okay. Thank you. And I also want to acknowledge in the audience, we have Dan Wiley from Congressmember Nydia Velazquez.
Okay, so I'm David Gotti. I'm here representing, I'm on the board of a community organization, one of the nonprofits, the major tenant at 234 Butler Street right now. Spoke the Hub, which has been a tremendous community resource for 30 years. The founder and director is Elise Long. The Spoke has 2 locations, one of which is on Butler Street around the corner. And we're in the process of renovating the Butler Street location, and that is not expected to be done until sometime next summer. So we are highly concerned, so we were I was really happy to hear your comments, Richard, about questions about, well, what's the actual timeline look like? What kind of accommodations are going to be made for the nonprofits and the organizations? What kind of help in that? So I would just say that is great, because it would be a severe hardship on Spoke the Hub, as well as a large number of independent artists who rent space from Spoke, as well as some programs, including programs for children, to be faced with eviction anytime in the next year. And I know that Spoke and other organizations probably could use some help in being able to move if there's we don't have a guarantee that our building will be done in 1 year, et cetera. So I'm really happy to hear about those, and I would request that your office continues to push on those issues, because those are really important. Anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Next speaker is Peter Reich.
First, I just want to say I love the Gowanus station. It makes me smile to walk by it. I just want to put that simple.
Again, say your name for the record.
Peter Reich. It's a beautiful building, and anything that can be done to save all of it. I'm not even going to go for part of it because I love all of it. But that's unfortunately not the main reason I'm standing up here. I just wanted to put, my wife Karen is over there, I wanted to put a couple of faces on 280 Nevins Street. I guess I should be happy that at least this late date we're hearing words like, not sure if we can properly mitigate noise. It's a building, artists in residence building. There are upwards of 20 artists in residence and their children. Obviously, you know, it would be a tremendous hardship. I just have to say it publicly. I'll submit it in writing. Because I like thinking and tinkering about things, I have to ask for the record if Sackett Street itself is part of the staging area. From the drawing that was shown up here, it wasn't outlined in red. And it's just a matter of any distance that can be put between us and if the footprint of Eastern Effects is the beginning of the staging area. Just having a little bit more space, I have no idea if it's feasible to have a noise mitigation wall of any sort erected, if that's a minor expense for a project of this nature. And I look forward to all the outreach that may be reaching out to help us solve the problems. I should also mention that J&M Special Effects depends on Sackett Street. They're our next door neighbors. That's their only way into their business, so hopefully Sackett isn't included in the staging area, but and finally, Freak's Mill is a wonderful restaurant. I don't think that the hours of construction will impede on it, but it occurs to me that we should all ask what the hours of construction are going to be, what the starting time especially is going to be, assuming we'll be working after dark. And that's enough. I won't mitigate myself. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one more speaker, and again, if someone else would like to speak and sign in a slip, Marlene Donnelly.
I'm Marlene Donnelly, a local resident. I've been there in the area for about 25 years, and I'm calling the Borough President to oppose the entire action that's going on here. Part of that is we've been talking about the historic buildings, and I second what my neighbors have said about keeping the historic structure there. But what upsets me mostly about this project is the price, and we're not talking about the costs. When this project was first proposed and put forward, we found out a tweet that was put out by Brad Lander where he secured over $500 million to cover the cost. Over $500 million is more than the entire cost of the entire Superfund cleanup. The EPA's record of decision has an alternative site that's in the project with an estimated cost of about $78 million. That's a huge increase over what the initial cost was for the sewage holding tank. We were told that we were supposed to buy into this other alternative site primarily because of the environmental injustice of our neighbors, my neighbors, using use of a swimming pool that is open for 2 months of a year, for possibly 2 years, maybe 4, maybe 6 months of use of a swimming pool being lost. And that's supposed to justify the additional expense of over $325 million in the area, and losing a historic structure building. I don't buy into this whole idea that the environmental injustice we've been suffering through here is that we're going to lose use of a swimming pool, but the fact that the city of New York put a swimming pool in a toxic waste site, and why we are defending the process of people using that pool for a longer period of time because so they can swim in a toxic waste site is beyond belief for me. But what I'm upset about is that this is DEP money that is being put towards this. I have been active in trying to get the DEP to deal with sewage on our canal for years, and I've had the opportunity to meet with the Swim Coalition people across this entire city. I've met with people in the Bronx, people in Staten Island, people all over Brooklyn, and people all over Queens who suffer from severe, unmitigated environmental injustice from sewage infrastructure problems. And every time they meet with the DEP, as Gowanus has always had in the past, we have been told there's no money. There's no money. And every time we had funded even for our sewage work that was supposed to take place back in 2004, the money was pulled and sent to Manhattan because Donald Trump was building lots of big buildings in Manhattan and they had to put the money there. Finally, Donald Trump and all his folks are interested in the Gowanus Canal, and suddenly we have $500 million being thrown at acquiring land. It's not even for sewage infrastructure. It's for land acquisition. And this is just appalling to me. We have tried to meet, we met with the Comptroller's Office thinking there are checks and balances on these sorts of expenses, and there aren't. There are really no checks and balances. They just want to throw money at land development, land acquisition. This is our sewage tax money. This is the wrong action. It's the wrong project. We do have an alternative plan. We could have less impact of construction and debris and noise and even debris removal if we just dug one hole in our community, took the toxic waste dump out underneath the swimming pool, and move on to put the sewage tank as it was planned in there. You cut your costs because you're doubling up efforts. This is, I think, a folly that we're even discussing this, that this whole process is moving forward, and I ask the Borough President often to just flat out say this whole is a bad process, it's a bad deal. It's a bad deal for Brooklyn, it's a bad deal for the people in the Bronx, it's a bad deal for the people in Staten Island, and it's a bad people out in Jamaica Bay. Let's put our sewage money into sewage infrastructure, not in land acquisition.
Thank you. So do we have anyone else who would like to sign in to speak on this matter? The hearing on these items is now closed. Thank you for participating in this public hearing. Borough President Adams will review the applications we heard today and will soon submit his recommendations to the City Planning Commission. Borough President Adams would like to take this opportunity to remind you that the City Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on these items. The hearing is now adjourned. Borough President Adams would like to remind those viewing on the website that timely comments can be submitted by email to askeric@brooklynbp.nyc.gov. Thank you.